Good morning, class. Today is the first day of Unit 2, where we'll be focusing on reading strategies. We will be reading many different types of texts around the same theme. We're going to be reading a lot about young people like yourselves who have gone through some difficulties but survived. And we're going to talk a lot about strategies for dealing with difficult situations. Now, before we start our reading lesson, let us talk about what it means to read. Now, I don't know if you remember this about me, but I love reading. Reading is my favorite pastime. Now, I've decided to give you a quotation today that's just about reading. And it says, "Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body." Now, let's think about it. What do we think a quotation like this means? To me, it means that reading is as important as exercise. We all know that exercise is important and that without exercise, we are less likely to be healthy and happy. Exercise protects our body, but what protects our brain? What keeps us smart? What makes us think about things clearly? What teaches us about the world? Reading. Now, if you want to be as smart as possible, if you want to be able to understand people and parts of the world and what's happening, you need to read. A question for you is, how often do you exercise your mind? How much time do you spend reading? Something that I want us all to do is to not just work on our bodies, but work on our minds. It doesn't matter what we read. I read anything from newspapers to novels to plays to poems to short stories. Sometimes I'll go on the internet and read stories about what's happening all over the world. For me, it's a way to connect myself to the rest of the world, but also to learn a lot. Every time I read, I learn new words and new expressions. I learn new ways of thinking about things I've never experienced before, or maybe that happened to me, but I didn't really understand. So by reading, you are building that muscle that is your brain, and you are becoming a better person. So I want you to think, how are you exercising your mind? And as much as possible, find something to read. It doesn't matter what it is. Now let's start with our lesson for today. Today, we are going to start learning about reading strategies, which are just techniques that we use to help us when we're reading. Effective readers use strategies before they read, while they're reading, and when they're done reading. And all of these strategies help them to understand the text as much as possible. Today, we are focusing on pre-reading. When we look at the words pre-reading, we have to figure out what it means. Now, we all know what a prefix is. It comes at the start of the word and it changes the meaning. Now, the prefix pre means before. So pre-reading simply means before we read. Now, before you even start to read a book or any kind of text, you generally have an idea what that text is about. Think about when you go to the bookstore or to the library and you want to get a book to read. The first thing you do is you look at the front of the book. It has pictures, it has a title, it's got some information even on the back. When we do this, we're using pre-reading strategies to help us figure out what this text is about and if it's something that we want to read. When we think about pre-reading, there are three main steps that we take, and those are what we're going to learn today. The first step requires using prior knowledge to think about the topic. What do I already know about it? The second strategy is making a prediction about the meaning of the text. What do you think the text is going to be about? And our third step is previewing the text by skimming and scanning, and that will give us an overall sense of what the text is about. Now let's go to step one, using our prior knowledge. The article we're reading today is called "I Struggle to Read." When we look at this title, we ask ourselves some questions. What does it mean to struggle? Is this something that I've experienced? Can I imagine what it would be like to struggle to read? Is this something that you have ever said? Now, all of us here, well, rather, all of you are English learners. I perhaps am learning many other languages, including Chinese and French, so I also struggle to read. So when you started learning English, at some point you would have had a struggle. It would have been difficult. You didn't necessarily understand everything you read, the words were strange, and you were a little bit confused. So our prior knowledge of struggling and struggling to read already puts a picture in our mind about what this story might be about because we've already experienced it. So before we go forward, think about it. When have you struggled to read? And if you were writing a story about your struggles to read, what would you write about? Could that be what this text is about? We don't know yet. We're going to find out. Step 2 is making predictions about the meaning of the text. Again, predictions is when you guess what is going to happen. So now that we've thought about the title and what we know about it, what do we think the article is going to be about? What is the author going to tell us? Is he going to spend the whole article telling us about all his troubles with reading? Not being able to read, not passing his classes, being upset? Is he going to tell you about how hard it is not knowing how to read? Or is he going to tell us how he got over this problem? He didn't know how to read, now he can read. There's a hint in the title that can help us to understand. The title doesn't say, I struggle to read, which would mean right now I'm still struggling. It says, I struggled. The past tense ed tells us that he had a problem before and that perhaps this problem is gone. So it is possible that we can predict that this article will tell us about his struggles in part 1. And perhaps in the second section of the article, it will tell us how he got over the struggle, what he did in order to be able to read and understand his text. The last thing we do when we preview is we skim and we scan. You look at the paper, you look at the book, you look at the article. What do you see? There are usually several hints that will give you an idea of what the text is about. Our first hint is at the top left corner in a little green circle. It says true teen story. The word true tells us that this is a fact. This is not a made up story, but this is a real story about a person who struggled to read. Then there is a picture of a young man who is reading. You can ask yourself, who is this young man? Is this story about him? Under the picture, there is a caption, words that describe the picture. And it tells us hard at work. Jalen listens to an audiobook and reads along at the same time. Now, we already thought that the article might tell us about how he got over his struggle. So perhaps this is a hint to us about one of the ways that he got over his struggle. Next, we look at number 3 at the top, where we have a short overview of the article. We read this before we start reading the article, and it really tells us what we're going to see. It tells us that Jalen at 17 couldn't make sense of the words on the page, and this happened for years, but then he learned special skills to help him overcome his challenges, which confirms to us what we thought in section 2, which is that he had a problem and then he was able to fix it. Perhaps the article is going to then tell us about how he solved this problem. If you look below in a small green box, we'll see vocabulary. We all know vocabulary is important. If we don't understand the words in an article, there's no real way for us to make sense of it. This vocabulary box gives us 5 keywords that will likely help us to understand the story. You'll also see those keywords highlighted in the text. They are big and they are dark in color. So before you start reading the article, you will definitely want to look at the vocabulary. Try to make sure you understand what they mean. Now, if you don't remember what they mean when you're reading, you can always pop over to the box and see what they mean. I want you guys to please pay attention to these words as I'll be testing you on them in the next class. Now, the next thing we see is number 4, which is something we call subheadings. Now, the subheadings is a smaller title that shows what the different sections of the article are going to be about. Now, on this first page, we see that there are two subheadings. The first one says missing out, and the second one says getting help. We can assume then that each section tells us something about the text. So the first section perhaps talks about how he missed out on various activities because of his trouble reading, but the next section is likely to tell us how he got help. So if we preview this page, we get lots of information about the article. A young man struggling to read, but he was able to overcome his challenges. A real story of a 17-year-old, some key words to help us understand the text, information about how he missed out on things, but how he was able to get help. If we put all three things together, we should have a good idea of what this text is going to be about. Therefore, when we start reading, it will be easier for us to understand the text. Now, here's an important point that I want you to remember. Don't get down on yourself if you can't come up with perfect answers for your pre-reading questions. It's just there to help us to get ready for reading, prepare us. There is no way for you to know if what you think the text is going to be about is real. Even if your answers are wrong, don't worry about it. You're still going to be able to understand because you've started to prepare your brain for what you're going to read. Be kind to yourself. It's okay if you don't understand it the first time around. Before we get on to the questions related to this article, you're going to do your own pre-reading activity. I've just walked you through the steps in pre-reading, the 3 steps. Now, what I want you to do is to open the document and go through each of the pre-reading steps. When you do that, you're going to answer 3 questions for me. First question, what do you know about this topic? Second question, what do you think this article is going to be about? And the last question, how do things like the pictures and the subtitles help you to understand what the article may be about? What hints do they give you about the article? Once you've done that, you're going to add it to your questions that you're going to do on the text. So once you've done pre-reading, you can start reading the article. So it's your job to read the entire article, and there are follow-up questions in the article and on Moodle designed to show if you understand the text. Since this is our first real activity together, don't worry if you don't get everything right. Do your best and try to answer all the questions. Good luck. I'll see you soon.